with yet another incident happening in the Overwatch scene, yet again on streaming platforms for the whole world to see. It made me think of the nature of the streamer's experience, also especially in Overwatch. These thoughts aren't there to rationalize the Dafran situation in particular, nor are they even really closely related, but merely a fragment on what it means to be a streamer in the current climate and to hopefully invoke some compassion where it is applicable. So let's establish some premises first. The first one will be a gut punch to many, but Overwatch as a streamed game is on a decline. Chat interaction in general is going down. The viewing numbers are going down. It indicates a problem when chat interaction is down. It also means less donations. The growth of the channel isn't as big, and your trajectory is certainly pointing downwards. And all the news we've recently gotten, other than we don't know about the impact of the replay viewer, but I don't know if it will be this big, has sort of, pointed towards a problem, especially for these streamers if they want to continue in their career. So the pressure is on the streamer to provide the entertainment, and when the game can't do it by itself anymore, one of the best sources to create entertainment and for people to connect to these streamers is through comedy. And obviously, with these streamers streaming 8 to 10 hours to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, you can't script out these comedic pieces. They have to come from a place of creativity and have to be created in the moment, and that is also what makes them so fun. Now, here lies the first decision for the streamer. And by choosing the approach, he attracts a certain audience. So the bigger the streamer, the more likely he is to attract all kinds of audiences. So what kind of audiences am I talking about? So if I'm often causing drama, I'm often around people that are into drama, if I'm sharing gossip and whatnot, this attracts a certain kind of audience that then will also interact with me with that expectation, right? While, for instance, like someone like Siegel, who always kept it fairly clean, fairly educational, has a much cleaner chat experience, and it's also not overwhelming for his mods to keep it clean. So what he sees is not nearly as vile in his chat as some of the other streamers are. So let's talk about the aspect of situational comedy. I would say most of the audience enjoys the impulsive style. The thing that comes up in the moment, someone's very quick-witted and it just sometimes hits, and it's very funny, and it doesn't take too much prep. It takes skill, though. Not everyone can do it. And the best ones have the biggest draw in that regard. So the impulsive creativity is where the fun is. And the impulse there plays with boundaries and is immediate. There's almost no barrier in the sense of it comes to my mind and it's out of my mouth. Because if you delay these by too much, it is, the famous thing where you think of a comeback 2 hours later in the shower. It's not funny anymore. And it's also not funny anymore even almost 10 seconds later. The payoff of the joke drops tremendously. So it is not applicable very often. You have to make it up on the fly. So here, an associative mind, a mind that sees things in similarities, helps. So it's perfect for that kind of improv, and minds that connect features in that way will always entertain people, even those that have associative minds themselves. So for instance, to give you an example, something would be like one of those streamers going on their stream, looking at their Twitter feed, seeing fusions and going, dude, Conan O'Brien on Boston, pork! Seemingly dumb stuff like that. But because it's coming in the moment and seeing that, that instant connection of him seeing maybe fusions for the first time in real life, seeing the facial features, the hairstyle or whatever, and that then connecting it to another thing, that is where the instant comedy happens. Now, I myself would generally count myself in that direction, which is also why you haven't seen me joke much in Overwatch, and I will explain why in a second. But it is about 40 to 60% of those jokes just miss. They are not funny. You don't know where you're going with this, and this is a crucial part. The impulsive or the associative mind starts talking and has almost a trust in his brain to give him the joke, to give him the funny bit that then makes it so that people can be entertained in that regard, right? There is no planning going on or much in that regard. Now, 59% or 39% of the time, the jokes are either from amusing to hilarious, and they're great, right? And that's a great sort of risk-reward ratio, right? In most cases, you're just boring. You look a little bit, like, oh, where is he going with this? Like the other times, you're absolutely hitting and you're entertaining people. And then there's this 1%, and it's probably even less than 1%, but 1% or less are just morally unacceptable jokes. You danced around the boundary. You haven't really checked with the, morality of what you're saying. And it's absolutely from vile to bigoted, or, all these ranges. And it is then hurtful, right? It is not hurtful in your mind, but that is where the distinction really lies, in the sense that there doesn't seem to be a barrier for many of those. So, okay, so you're an impulsive streamer, or you're one with the associative mind that also just keeps, getting banger after banger, very high hit rate on those. So your brain develops a positive feedback loop. And here I will argue, herein lies the second responsibility of the streamer. The first one was the type of content that he wants to create. And the second one is the barrier between thought pops up and goes out my mouth. There can be a delay, and it is upon the streamer to find that boundary, right? So most of the time, it is a very positive feedback loop. Joke, chat reaction, joke, chat reaction, stream growth, risk taken, and reward gained, right? So let's observe the nature of consciousness, at least as I perceive it, right? Or the mind, rather. So for those who have meditative experiences, I would pose, or even those without, I would say that the vast majority of your thoughts feel involuntarily and are probably involuntary. Whatever pops up in your mind, you have intrusive thoughts. Thoughts are so vile that, or just weird, something in you tells you to jump off a cliff, which is called L'appel de vide, or Call of the Void in English. So that draw, all these weird connections you're making, all the things you care about but shouldn't really care about, all this piles up, and most of us are involuntary thinkers that are dominated by their thoughts in that regard, without having any control over them. What we do have control over, though, is what comes out of our mouth, most of the time. So the meditative experience then is almost like sitting in front of a mouse hole as the cat and looking what comes out of the mouse hole. So what you have a sort of focus, which is the mouse hole, and then you see what else your consciousness, your mind gives you, and what thoughts pop up. And the meditative experience then says, just let it go. Realize that it came out of the mouse hole, but let it go. And remain at ease and keep focusing on the mouse hole. So funny, impulsive people trust their minds to hand them the joke. So they will stand in front of the mouse hole, take whatever comes out and throw it at the crowd. And most of the time it will be fun, some fun, you know, balloon or whatever, anything that makes people enjoy them. But sometimes it will be terrible, right? And they don't know what's coming until it does, right? So, as I said, the same is true for me, very much so. I experienced that in myself. My type of humor, I don't feel particularly humored unless boundaries are pushed and novelties created by the person that I'm watching, or that even in stand-up comedy, right? So my humor as well in that regards works as such, but for the time being, I have first resorted to completely getting rid of it in most of my content that I do, and then now I'm currently transitioning to in order to inject it into the thing while continuing meditative practices and being more aware what comes out and giving it that brief second where I check for morality reasons, right? Where I look at the thought and think, what I'm saying, is that A, what I am, or who I want to be, and could it hurt people? And then you have control over the thought, and this can happen so quickly, but with an attentive mind, that it remains fun while being much safer. And you will fail, but it definitely increases your failure rate or decreases your failure rate in that regard. So the streamer has the choice to delay the impulse, to check, right? And that can be enhanced with meditative practices. And here is where I think we have to see the world from the streamer that has made the decision in the past to create a certain type of content. And I hope my elaboration will evoke some sort of compassion towards their experience. Because while they have made mistakes and they have dug their own grave in some sense, at least in some regard, it still is an experience that punishes these lapses in judgment much more harshly than life usually does. Right? So the streamer which has made the decision to focus his content more on edgy jokes or drama has created an echo chamber of and that is true for every streamer, I think, anxiety to perform for their audience. He has created an environment through the chat, and chat interaction is very, very important, and input is output. So the constant edgy spurring on that comes from his chat, from the people that have been attracted by the edge, if you want, in the first place, now the streamer has to absorb this bile constantly, right? His thoughts themselves are primed towards, going to these places. Now, if you don't know what priming is, it is basically that if someone puts you into a specific mind frame, so for instance, tells you about a toy store or puppets or whatever, then you're much more likely to answer, in that regard, to questions that are sort of very open and ambiguous in themselves, and you will be much more likely to, act in this way. And this is how advertisement works, how elections work. Priming is everywhere, but as the input is immediately in, and you feel also, the best way I guess I can give you an example of is if someone has a very shrill way of talking to you, or is very toxic in your solo queue game, it sort of seeps into you. Now imagine in text form having thousands of these people, and they spur you on, and it's also constantly negative talk if you don't go there, and it's actually the closest probably that I can relate it to is self-induced schizophrenia. is how it is. The experience has been described to me by streamers, because it's like voices in your head that tell you to do things that maybe you don't want to do, or that are just, you know, vile in some sense. So in that regard, for their situation, I think there is compassion, because they made mistakes along the way, but they also deserve compassion for the prison, yes, they have created for themselves, but the other guards, the viewers, the chat, they are also guarding that prison with such nefarious and wretched fervor. Thanks for watching.